From KLCC Studios, this is Oregon on the Record.
I'm Michael Dunn. It wasn't that long ago that if you heard someone say electric car, you instantly thought of something that looked like a glorified golf cart that no one would actually want to drive. Today, electric cars are some of the coolest vehicles on the road, and electric trucks are marketed as beasts that climb mountains and haul fishing boats. In short, electric vehicles, or EVs, have not only arrived, they become mainstream. But while EV sales continue to climb, the infrastructure needed to power this new fleet is both trying to catch up while greatly expanding to meet the needs of an almost universal EV future. Today on Oregon on the Record, we'll talk to experts at EWEB, local municipalities, and the Oregon Department of Energy to hear how they're preparing for the continuation of the EV revolution. We'll also hear from Eugene's own Arcimoto to learn how they're trying to stay competitive in a marketplace that experts say will explode in just the next few years. EVs now number nearly 75,000 in Oregon, and that number is going to rise and rise in the coming years. In fact, most major car companies have said they plan to go all electric by 2040 or earlier. And while EVs have been around for decades, they pretty much existed on the fringes of consumer appeal. They were always too expensive, too small, too weird looking, or too limited in range for most people to seriously consider buying one. But in the last decade, we've seen the EV take center stage. They've come down in price, the range between charges has increased, and in all honesty, they're some of the coolest cars on the road today. Yet some obstacles exist. No matter how good the batteries are today, most still don't rival the distance capability of a traditional gas-powered car, and there isn't a charging station on every block like there is a gas station. Today on Oregon on the Record, we'll talk with experts about EVs and how our cities, state, and utilities are planning to boost the infrastructure needed to accommodate their growth. And we'll also talk with Eugene's own EV company, Arcimoto, and find out about how they're trying to find their niche in the EV future. First, let's talk with the State of Oregon Department of Energy to hear what they're doing to encourage EV participation. Jessica Rikers, the Technology and Policy Manager for the Oregon Department of Energy, thanks so much for talking with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Whatever level of specificity you want to get into, if you could provide us maybe some statistics about the popularity or the use of electric vehicles here in Oregon.
Absolutely. So as of the end of June, we have about 72,000 registered light duty or what we call passenger vehicles in the state of Oregon. That's actually quite a bit. Oregon is one of the fastest adopting states for electric vehicles. It's about 2% of our current light duty registrations. And we've hit some really impressive growth rates in electric vehicle sales. At the end of the fourth quarter in 2022, we were at 12%, which is almost but not quite double what the national sales trend was. And in the first quarter of this last year, we hit over 16%, which put us second only behind the state of California. We do battle it out with Washington State as to who's going to be second or third. And in the second quarter, we were third, but we're right up there with them. So really popular vehicles in the state of Oregon.
Yeah. And just for our listeners, would an EV be classified as 100% powered by electricity, or do plug-in hybrids kind of fit into that model as well, where they have some electric capacity, but they also have a gas tank?
Yeah, absolutely. This is where I'm going to blow people's minds. Electric vehicles can mean a lot of different things. So battery electric vehicles are considered zero emission. They have no tailpipe emissions, and they use the battery only to power the vehicle. They plug in to charge, and they're powered only by the battery. Plug-in hybrid electric vehicles are also considered zero emission vehicles. They could have some tailpipe emissions because they use a battery that can be plugged in to charge, but they also have some form of gas or potentially diesel power that can supplement that battery. Sometimes that's just a generator to put onto the battery, add more charge to the battery. Often it's a separate little engine that can drive the car. Those are considered zero emission vehicles. Now, Priuses, like you used to see, which have a battery that charges from the driving the vehicle, those do not count as a zero emission vehicle, although very good fuel efficient cars. And last, there's another version of electric vehicle. We don't have any in Oregon. They're called fuel cell electric vehicles. They run on hydrogen, no tailpipe emissions again, but we don't have any hydrogen fueling infrastructure to support these cars, although that might be changing soon. So stay tuned on that. But basically, there's three types of electric vehicles that could be out there.
Okay. Speaking for the Department of Energy, are there programs, education programs that you look to or that you implement to help both encourage people to look at EVs, but also educate them about what an EV is and what it can do and what it can't do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm proud to say that the Oregon Department of Energy does produce for the state the goelectric.oregon.gov website. It's a really great starting point for people who are interested in electric vehicles but don't know a lot about them. There's links to what kinds of vehicles are out there, what kinds of incentives are available, like tax credits or rebates, other types of programs that could help support charging for the car, and just some general information. So we manage that, keep it up to date. But I have to say that it really does, at the state level, take a village to encourage EV adoption. We provide a lot of information out there. We've got that website. We've got an electric vehicle dashboard. If you're interested in seeing how EVs are being adopted across the state, we update that monthly. We have other programs as well, but then we've got the Department of Environmental Quality, who has a program which requires zero emission vehicles are delivered into the state to be sold. So that makes them available for people. And they have a rebate program that can help people reduce the costs that they have to pay for electric vehicles up front. And our Department of Transportation is actively working on getting charging infrastructure across the whole state so that there's plenty of places to fuel these vehicles. And our Public Utility Commission often forgot about in this conversation, but they're critical in working with our utilities who are thinking about how transportation electrification might affect the future needs of our electric grid. Okay. So all of these agencies work together to help make EV adoption more amenable to people in Oregon.
Sure. Now, I imagine, too, that and I'm not sure if I want to say, kind of myth busting about EVs, but in addition to, like you talked about, you have an FAQ on your website and stuff. What are maybe some things that, whether it's you personally have talked to people or others in your department have talked to people who say, boy, it really sounds great to get into an electric vehicle, but, I'm concerned about X. Maybe it's cost. Maybe it's about, how far do they go? What are some of those things that your department and this other village you just talked about, what are some of those common things that maybe you need to help people understand to maybe get over that hurdle that might stop somebody from going EV?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So first, I'd just like to say, EVs may not be the right choice for everyone. Okay. And that something that I think is really important to think about. There are places in Oregon where there's just not a lot of fueling infrastructure right now. That's changing, but that may be a place where you live, and it may be hard to think about how you could bring an electric vehicle into your life. But as far as the things where I think people might want some additional information to kind of inform their decision making, like when they're out thinking about buying that next car, two things come to mind. One is, we get a lot of questions about whether electric vehicles are cheaper than their internal combustion engine counterparts or gasoline counterparts. And they can be more expensive. And in fact, there's probably more of the higher end, higher cost vehicles available for electric formats than there are just standard gasoline vehicles. But that's changing. Many of the auto manufacturers out there they have goals set for how many electric vehicle models they're going to be providing in the next 5 to 10 years. And we have many models that are available that are really low cost opportunity for people. But you should look at those overall costs. But one thing that's really critical is the fueling cost. And there's been a lot of discussion lately about that several new studies have come out that have indicated that they find it would be more expensive to fuel a car using electricity than gasoline. But we looked at the Oregon Department of Energy, and we found that that's not the case in Oregon. We are paying much less if you can fuel at home your electric vehicle. And even if you have to use public charging infrastructure, like a lot of folks would if they live in, say, an apartment or a condominium, they may not have access to charging at home, but they can charge their car on public infrastructure. Even a little study we did on that was really just back of the envelope, but still, excuse me, much less cost effective.
Okay. Okay.
Much cheaper. Excuse me.
Okay. Okay. Um, speaking of that charging infrastructure, if you could sort of give us a picture, a lay of the land, if you will, in Oregon about charging infrastructure, because, obviously we're all so used to, and I think it's fun to think about, in the last century, I'm sure there were many people thinking, boy, I tell you what, these internal combustion engines are great, but where am I going to fuel it? And then, of course, we saw the infrastructure spring up and there was a gas station almost on every corner. Where are we, roughly speaking, in terms of the availability of charging infrastructure so that people can feel more secure that they're not going to be stranded on the side of the road?
Yeah, great question. And this is something that is actively and robustly changing in the environment. So first, let me explain one thing that gets really weedy, but it's important.
Okay.
There are 3 different types of fast charging.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're out traveling and you need a charger quickly to get fueled up again, these are fast chargers.
Mm-hmm.
And those are Tesla. Tesla has their own version of charging, and that's sometimes referred to as the North American Charging Standard, or NACS.
Okay.
There's also the CCS, Combined Charging System. Most vehicles now that aren't Tesla use the CCS charging system.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the auto manufacturers that are out there have now announced that they are going to adopt the Tesla standard.
Okay.
Starting with 2025 model year vehicles. And even ones they're selling now, they're going to sell adapters for. So the reason I mention that is it opens up the network. Tesla by far had the more robust network out of all of the charging networks that were available out there. We suddenly are going to have a very rapid increase in available charging just because suddenly stations that weren't available to people will start to become available. Now, it won't happen overnight, but it's going to happen relatively quickly.
My last question for you is kind of ask you to put on your crystal ball, kind of what do you think the EV market here in Oregon may look like in, say, the next 5 to 10 years? What are your projections say about adoption, and I'd ask that both in terms of just perhaps number of vehicles that we might see, but then also maybe an expansion of those charging stations we just talked about.
Yeah, great question. And I love thinking about the future and what it might look like. It's one of the fun parts of my job.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to see a lot more electric vehicles available out there, and many more different types, more akin to what we're used to with gasoline vehicles. Anything from pickup trucks to SUVs to vans to sedans. There's just going to be more models available for people with a broader array of costs. Our used vehicle market is going to increase as more and more of these new vehicles enter the market. They will then eventually end up in our used markets, which is really important because the vast majority of people do not buy used cars. They buy used cars.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, do not buy new cars. They buy used cars.
Okay.
So that's a big deal. And the charging infrastructure, if you haven't noticed EV charging yet, I can almost guarantee most people will notice it in the next few years. It's coming up all over the place. You'll see it at a lot of big box stores. You see it more near to bigger thoroughfares like I-5 and I-84.
Okay.
It's just going to become more ubiquitous. And I'll even throw out one maybe slightly risky anticipation of the future, which is
okay.
And Washington State collaborated on a grant and were awarded that grant just recently in the last couple of weeks from the U.S. Department of Energy to build a hydrogen hub up in the Pacific Northwest.
Wow.
And that, I think, will be something that will bring fuel cell electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles into the area. So maybe by 2030, somewhere in there, we might start to see more of those hydrogen vehicles on the road too.
Well, Jessica Reichers, the Technology and Policy Manager for the Oregon Department of Energy, thanks so much for talking with us.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you.
I'm Michael Dunn, and you're listening to Oregon on the Record from KLCC and our show about electric vehicles. Our next guest is a City of Eugene transportation planner, and he'll tell us how Eugene is working to become an EV hub. Logan Tellis, Associate Transportation Planner with the City of Eugene. Really appreciate you coming on the show and talking with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Michael.
Yeah. However you're comfortable sort of enumerating this, do you have any stats or just general ideas about the popularity of electric vehicles here in Eugene?
Yes, so the Oregon Department of Transportation periodically publishes data on EV registrations.
Hmm.
And the data they released over the summer indicates that Eugene has approximately 4,370 electric vehicles,
Wow.
which makes us the second highest city in terms of EV registrations in Oregon.
Wow.
And this also represents around 130% increase since 2020 levels. So city staff are certainly feeling optimistic about how many people are switching to EVs in our area.
Okay. Okay. And then, so from the city's perspective, what does the city do to encourage and or educate people about EV use?
Well, we do a number of things to help people make the switch. I think one of the most impactful areas of work is our work around public charging stations. Many studies and surveys have found that range anxiety is the number one barrier discouraging people from switching to EVs.
Hmm.
For anyone who doesn't know, range anxiety is the fear of running out of battery before you're able to reach a charging station. So the city currently owns around public 20, about around 20 public level 2 charging stations, which
Okay.
are mostly concentrated in our downtown parking garages.
Okay.
We don't charge for people to plug in and get power. There may still be a parking fee at the locations, though.
Sure. And could you, for our listeners who may not know, describe the difference between, say, a level 2 and a level 3 charger?
Sure. So the three levels of chargers are all about the speed of charging.
Mm-hmm.
So level one is going to be the slowest speed of charging. It's going to be something somebody does with just a standard outlet in their own garage at home, typically. A level two charger, it could be at someone's home. It could also be out in public. You can kind of think of it as being the medium speed charger. And then level three, which is also often referred to as DC fast charging,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be the highest speed of charger. They're very large, very expensive. They're typically only going to be public stations. You're not going to find a level three charger at someone's house generally.
Got it. Got it. So what might we see in the next year or three or something like that in terms of perhaps an increase in that kind of infrastructure, that charging infrastructure you were just talking about here in the city of Eugene?
Right. So the city of Eugene certainly recognizes that we want to expand our network of public charging stations.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a number of things we're doing to try accommodating that. Earlier this year, we submitted a joint grant application with Lane County for a federal grant program called the Community Fueling Infrastructure Grant. If that application ends up being successful, it would likely bring in an additional $1 million for new public charging stations in Eugene. So fingers crossed on that. We expect to hear back before the end of the fall about whether that application is being funded or not.
Got it.
But aside from that grant, we're in the early stages of trying to develop an electric vehicle infrastructure plan. At this point, we're really just getting our ducks in a row to try hiring consultant support for the project. But the idea is that planning process will help us identify, exactly how we'd ideally like to build out our charging station network over time, including mapping out specific locations where we'd like to invest in charging infrastructure in the future. We do know at this point, there are certain types of locations we certainly have an interest in, things like community center parking lots, parks parking lots, and even some certain on-street parking spaces could be really good candidates for future charging stations.
Got it. You mentioned range anxiety, and certainly we've heard that often. But are there other challenges to EV adoption that you hear about, and are there ways to kind of help overcome that some of those whether they're mental barriers or financial barriers for EVs?
Yeah, so I think one thing that is definitely a barrier for some folks, and certainly has been over the past several years, is feeling like there's a limited selection on the market, especially, thinking back over the past 5 years. I feel like a lot of folks looked around and they saw some EV models and they didn't really feel like there was something that could really fit with their particular needs. And I think that as more manufacturers release more electric models, that is something that has dramatically improved over time. And I think that's something that is helping stimulate adoption rates. You know, for example, if you and I were having this conversation 5 years ago, it would have been quite difficult for somebody to locate a market available electric pickup truck.
Mm-hmm.
And now that's an option that's available to folks. So I think the expanding availability of different types of vehicles is certainly helping. As far as cost goes, I know that's still a barrier for a lot of folks. And one, pilot program, relatively small pilot program, the city is a partner on, and the program's really primarily being led by eWeb and Fourth Mobility, which is a nonprofit and based out of Portland, is a small-scale electric car share program. So there are some electric car share vehicles available, scattered across currently 3 sites in Eugene. There's a downtown location and a location at Santa Clara Transit Station and a location at Iris Place, which is a affordable housing development on River Road.
Okay.
And so these car share vehicles are available for folks to utilize at relatively low cost. So they can take it, they could use it for electric trips. They could use it to just kind of get a feel for whether an EV might be a good option for them, use it for errands, things like that. So car share could be an opportunity for us to kind of mitigate that cost barrier for a lot of folks when it comes to EVs.
Okay. And you may not have an answer for this, but just thought I'd throw that out there. You know, a lot of times, obviously, when a development comes in, there might be, like, say, someone's going to build a multi-dwelling unit, and there might be certain incentives that a city might provide, or tax incentives, whatever it is. I'm wondering, has it been discussed about, let's say somebody wants to build a big 200-unit apartment complex, and might it be that we're getting to the point where it might be an incentive or something like that for that private development to put in charging stations to make it even easier for folks to charge?
Mm-hmm. So eWeb does have a rebate program available for electric vehicle chargers at commercial and multifamily housing sites.
Okay.
So that is something that is available to folks. There's also a low. It's not as high of a rebate, but there is also a version of that program for people installing level 2 stations at their homes. So there are local rebates available for charging stations in people's homes and also at multifamily and commercial destinations.
Got it.
That being said, I think a lot of property owners, they're not as familiar with EVs quite yet. And
Sure.
I think there is a case for the city to be making with folks about the allure of EV charging stations being a great amenity for tenants, a great amenity for customers. So I do think we definitely have some communications work to do around that, helping spread the word about why electric vehicle charging stations could be a really great opportunity for a lot of apartment complexes and businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Obviously, there's been the city council was in the news fairly recently about the idea of kind of capping the number of new gas stations that might come into the city, and I think part of that discussion is around, and I'm not going to ask you to weigh in on council decisions, but I'm wondering, can you see, out in the maybe fairly, not so distant future, this idea that we're starting to reach that tipping point of access points for vehicles? Obviously, we're all extremely familiar with gas stations. We come to rely on them for our gas-powered vehicles in cities, in rural areas, along the interstate, so on and so forth. Do you think we're getting close to that point where charging stations are going to become, at least maybe not quite as ubiquitous, but pretty darn close to that?
I think we will get there eventually.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing that is a really positive development that's taken place in recent years is, at the state legislative level, building code changes that are requiring a certain number of parking spaces to be quote unquote EV ready,
Mm-hmm.
which really means installing the conduit to support a future charging station. It doesn't necessarily require a charging station be involved. But, new developments over a certain number of units, commercial developments, a lot of them these days are being required to be built with the conduit in place, which is kind of like the in-ground infrastructure that could connect a station into the grid. And having that in place at the time of construction is going to be really helpful down the line, as EVs become more popular and as more business owners are hopefully making the switch and putting in EV charging stations as an amenity for customers and tenants. Because that putting in that conduit, digging up the concrete and trenching and putting in the conduit and then paving it all back over tends to be one of the biggest costs associated with putting in charging stations. So I think that is an area where we've seen a lot of great progress, and that's going to help people and facilitate this switch down the road as more and more folks start asking about, business owners and multifamily property managers about, hey, like I want to purchase an EV. Can you put in a charger as an amenity for me?
Yeah. Exciting times. Well, Logan Tellis, the Associate Transportation Planner for the City of Eugene, really appreciate, as always, you coming on and talking to us about this, about EVs and all things transportation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Michael.
I'm Michael Dunn, and this is Oregon on the Record. Up next, we talk with eWeb and hear about where all the power is going to come from to power up the local EV revolution. Aaron Orlowski, eWeb spokesperson, thanks so much for coming in and talking to us.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, maybe, talk about sort of the participation, the role that eWeb has in terms of, we're seeing a lot more people purchasing electric vehicles. What is eWeb doing to sort of, I guess, prepare our community for even more and more EV use?
Well, first of all, eWeb does support the electrification of the transportation sector as a way to help our community reduce carbon emissions. Mm-hmm. Transportation is the highest source of carbon emissions in our community, so anything we can do to help our customers reduce those emissions is a good thing. Mm-hmm. So that comes for eWeb, that comes in two ways primarily. We need to make sure that we have enough energy to supply our customers' needs and meet their needs for charging their vehicles and using them. And then we also need to make sure that our local distribution system, so the poles and wires and substations and transformers and all that equipment, is ready to handle those EVs and handle that charging demand. Mm-hmm.
And so where do we stand now? I imagine that from eWeb's perspective, there needs to be a certain amount of forecasting, if you will. Obviously, certainly anybody who lives in Eugene, our community, has seen more and more EVs out there. But obviously, we keep hearing that especially large manufacturers are going to be making more and more of them. Kind of from a forecasting perspective, are you ready for the next wave of EVs, or is it that it's kind of maybe a slow build?
It is a slow build, and also we are ready for the next wave of EVs. So currently, according to state data, there are about 4,100 electric vehicles registered in eWeb service territory, and we project that that's going to rise. Like you said, more and more people are buying EVs. And so what we're doing on that energy supply side to make sure we have enough energy to serve our customers and meet those needs, we actually just concluded an analysis process called our integrated resource planning process. Mm-hmm. And that was basically looking 20 years into the future to see how much energy are we going to need and how can we meet those needs. So what we found is that, we really project that demand for electricity is going to start rising by about 2% per year starting around 2030. And that's largely attributable to electric vehicles. And in that process, we found that we have enough energy to meet the needs of our community today. And but there are going to be increased needs in the future, potentially as soon as 2026. So we're going to need to start looking at, what sources of energy, hydropower, solar, wind, all those sources we're going to need to get more of to meet those needs for our community in the future.
Yeah, I wonder during that process, during the forecasting, if you will, are there any concerns that all of a sudden we could have too many EVs drawing on power?
It'll be a gradual process. People are switching from their current gas-powered cars to their electric vehicles, and that process will be gradual. Like I said, there's about 4,100 currently registered in the community, and if you figure, there are about 200,000 people that we serve. So that's a relatively small proportion right now, but there is legislation that's really encouraging EV adoption. The Federal Inflation Reduction Act has a $7,500 rebate for purchasers of EVs. And right now, you have to wait till you file your taxes to get that $7,500. But starting in 2024, January 1st, it'll be at the point of sale. So you get that rebate as soon as you purchase the EV. So that's just one of the ways that we see, policy from the federal, state, local level is really encouraging EV adoption, and we're getting ready to meet those needs.
Yeah. Obviously, I always think of EVs as sort of, there are two steps. There's the vehicle itself, but then, of course, there's charging. And I wanted to sort of get your, however you want to quantify it or just evaluate it in terms of, many people charge their EVs at home who own them. But, of course, they're out and about and they want to be able to charge them, on their routes. Kind of, how does eWeb sort of enter into the equation of the charging stations? And I know that there are levels of charging stations as well. There's the super quick, and then there's kind of the medium and whatnot.
Yeah, that's right. So, we've been following the studies that are coming out nationally and regionally, and what those are suggesting is that the vast majority of EV charging is going to be at the home. And then after that, some of it will occur at the workplace. Someone's driving to work, they charge their EV there. And then after that, maybe at locations such as grocery stores or other businesses where people linger for an hour or more. But like I said, the most of it will be at home. And eWeb supports that in a few ways. Right now, we have a $500 rebate that customers can take advantage of to install a level 2 charger in their home. And so that's like the mid-level of charger. It's better than just plugging your EV into basically the wall outlet, but it's not a supercharger. And that allows you to actually manage when you charge your EV. So that's part of the reason we really want to incentivize that, is because we need to manage when we charge the EV so that it's not straining the grid at different times of the day. But other charging options include, if you don't have the level 2 charger, you can just plug it essentially into the wall outlet. Charging your battery to full on an EV with that method takes a long time. And then there are, the Tesla superchargers that can juice up a EV in 20 or 30 minutes. And that's the kind of the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah. I would imagine that as a power company that supplies electricity, the relatively, I'd say, quick adoption of EVs, that must have been one of the most, exciting things to happen to a power company, but also with its own inherent challenges. Is there an analogy of another thing in sort of the electric use needs system that is analogous to EVs?
I mean, this is a huge transformation for our entire industry right now. eWeb's a not-for-profit electric utility, so we serve our customers and don't operate to earn a profit. And meeting their needs for electricity is our number one priority, making sure it's reliable and affordable, safe, and environmentally responsible. Our industry is really going through this interesting transformation, though, where if you kind of think of the old model, we just delivered electricity and it was a one-way relationship with the customers. We're moving to this new model where customers are interacting with us a lot more. They're managing when they use electricity. A lot of customers are generating some of their own electricity with some rooftop solar panels or that kind of thing. And we're developing this new relationship. So that's in the future, and it's something we're really getting ready for and making sure that we have all of the IT systems and the computer systems and the billing systems and infrastructure to really accommodate that new relationship that we'll have with our customers in the years ahead.
Yeah. And so really kind of my last question would be, what do you think the future is going to look like for EVs in the next maybe 5 to 10 years? And sort of, you've talked about some of the forecasting that you do. What do you think? Is it going to be that we're going to look out in 5 to 10 years and 50, 60% of the vehicles out there on the road in in Eugene and other areas might be EVs?
It's going to be a huge percentage in the years ahead. I mean, if you figure here in Oregon, the state has banned the sale of new gas-powered cars starting in 2035. So that's only a little more than a decade away. And that's going to have a big impact on the number of other types of vehicles, EVs, that are on the road. Also, one of the things I do want to mention is, we support that the home charging with the level 2 chargers and a $500 rebate for that. We also have rebates for businesses that are installing charging, and those businesses can include multifamily housing, so apartment complexes. So an apartment complex that's installing EV charging ports can get a $1,500 rebate per port, or $2,000 if it's an affordable housing complex. And the other thing with EVs and electric mobility that I think we really try and emphasize is that it's important to make sure that everyone has access. Not everyone can afford an EV.
Sure.
So that's why we have some programs that are really geared towards people who aren't EV owners. We have a $300 rebate for e-bikes, so people can get that if that's their mode of transportation. We also have a electric vehicle car share program. So if you just want to test out, what's it like to drive an EV, you can sign up with this program. And we have 3 stations around Eugene where you can get an electric vehicle and pay a small fee per hour to use it. So we really want to make sure that everyone, even non-EV owners, has access to electric mobility in the future.
Great. The future is here today. Aaron Orlowski, eWeb spokesperson, really appreciate you coming in and talking with us.
Thank you, Michael.
I'm Michael Dunn, and you're listening to Oregon on the Record from KLCC and our show about EVs. Arcimoto has been something of a darling of our local business community, coming out with their fun utility vehicles back in 2007. Today, the EV manufacturer is trying to find its place in a very dynamic and crowded environment. Miles Bell Brown, Director of Marketing for Arcimoto, thanks so much for coming in and talking with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me today.
Yeah, maybe for our listeners, kind of what's the role, what's the niche, if you will? What is how does Arcimoto fit in the overall sort of electric vehicle landscape?
Absolutely. So for Arcimoto, we're really revolutionizing the micromobility use case in this electric vehicle landscape. Our vehicles are considerably smaller and more compact than all the electric vehicles that are currently on the road. We're really leaning into the utility use case of our vehicles currently as well. And obviously we have our consumer version, which is the FUV, which is what you'll see buzzing around Eugene.
And FUV is
the 2-seater vehicle. It's a fun utility vehicle. Yes, sir.
Exactly,
so that's the one you're going to primarily see buzzing around Eugene as well as our other states. But we also have our MUV vehicle we just launched, which is the modern utility or modular utility vehicle. And that one's actually going to be great for last mile logistics, delivery, food delivery, all those type of industries as well.
Okay, great. Who's your typical customer? You talked about sort of the segmented market. Talk about them. Who are they?
Great question. So definitely on the consumer side of things, we're certainly seeing that 40 to 65-year-old age demographic. Typically folks who are obviously already electric vehicle friendly, people who are really looking for the advantages of having a more micro footprint for their vehicle. Going to and from the office, you get 102-mile range on our vehicles with a 75-mile-an-hour top speed. So, consumers who are really using it for their day-to-day commute, or maybe just to even want a secondary vehicle for the weekends as well.
Yeah. You launched, I believe, in 2007?
Yes.
And back then, I think the electronic vehicle sort of market was pretty nascent. And so you kind of got in at the very beginning. You've gone through a lot. There's been a lot of challenges up and down, leadership and financial. Kind of, is it that, especially when you started to today, it's almost 2 decades now, that whole market has gone through such a shift. What has it been like to sort of be this unique player in the EV market, while at the same time, a lot of the biggest, car manufacturing companies in the world have kind of staked their entire, modus operandi on converting to electric?
Absolutely. So speaking for myself, I joined Arcimoto just about 3 years ago.
Okay.
And for me, I actually come from working with a traditional automotive background, working with larger OEMs. But what really attracted me to Arcimoto was that it was such a unique offering in that market. And, for our founder, Mark Frohmeyer, this was really a vehicle that he wanted for himself, and it didn't exist on the road. So when he initially wanted to create it, it was more so filling a need that he felt existed. I think, again, what really separates us and what's been the unique challenge is just that we are offering a vehicle that is considerably smaller than all the other EVs that are on the road, but that is our advantage at the same time, where you really could take 2 to 3 FUVs and park it in a standard parking spot. And also it's taking up much less space on the road as well.
Okay. And for people who maybe don't know, is an Arcimoto, is it the Department of Transportation, whatever, is it rated differently than a traditional car? What are in addition to how it looks and stuff like that, what are some of the logistics around it?
Absolutely. So as a 3-wheel vehicle, we do have the unique advantage of being labeled as an auto cycle. So what the DOT essentially classifies us as is a hybrid of a motorcycle and a full-size car.
Got it.
So the unique challenges as well as advantages of that is it's a state-by-state thing. So here in Oregon, as well as California, you're not required to have a motorcycle endorsement to drive our vehicles, just a regular driver's license. You're not required to wear a helmet, any of those things. Then again, just by state, it depends on what their particular DMV is looking for. But that's something that we found a lot of customers really enjoy, because we do get customers who are saying, hey, I still love my motorcycle, but I want the safety of also being somewhat enclosed.
Sure.
And that's where we're seeing a lot of customer obviously transfer from that. And then also folks who maybe really love their full-size car, but they say, hey, you know what? I don't need to take a giant, a SUV to go get a latte every day. I can take this 2-seater FUV, and it's a much smaller footprint.
Sure. Kind of level set for us. How's the company doing today? Give us a picture of where Arcimoto is in November of 2023.
Absolutely, it's a great question. So as you called out earlier, as I'm sure especially local Eugene listeners will know, we've certainly gone through our challenges this last year, even recently some challenges. But I have to say, in the 3 years I've been here, every time we go through a challenge, the amazing thing about this company is it's kind of like the building will burn down and then we all come together and rebuild it. And currently, right now, we really, in my opinion, at least strategically, are in the best place we've ever been, where we have a very, very clear goal where we want to end up in the next year. And we have a great team of people who are all rowing in the same direction currently, and going towards some amazing opportunities. Our current CEO, Chris Dawson, has relocated to Eugene, as well as our current COO, and again, us all working together in tandem to continue just overcoming these challenges. Which all the EV companies are experiencing in the current market right now as well.
Sure.
So,
well, you mentioned Eugene. Kind of for the sort of the culture and the ethos of the company. Yeah. How important was it to be born of Eugene and continue to maintain your Eugene presence?
I think it's incredibly important. So I actually myself was born in Seattle, Washington, so I'm a Northwest kid as well. And I think just the Northwest in general is a great place for just embracing the importance of having a zero emissions vehicle, while also having folks who are friendly to the idea of something different. Here in the Northwest, we obviously love our outdoors, we love the environment, we love all these things, but we're also willing to make the sacrifices necessary to hopefully continue so my kids, the next generation, everyone can enjoy these things while we cut down on emissions. And the way to do that is with our vehicles. And Eugene is a perfect place for that, because it really embraces the culture that we're building.
Sure. I've talked to people before, a few decades ago, when the electronic vehicles first started, a lot of people would say, oh, it's a glorified golf cart.
Sure.
How important was it that your vehicle, I mean, I think a lot of people see it and go, what was that? Right. And how of that, what was that factor is part of the ethos of what you offer?
It's a huge part of it. And especially for me on the marketing side of things, again, coming from working with traditional OEMs to now doing this, where it is that is it a golf cart? Is this something that I'm going to, is dangerous to drive on the highways? It's become so important for us we get that wow factor, but then following up on that wow factor by saying, why don't you get behind the handlebars and we're actually going to give you a demo drive in it. And so really we call it butts and seats, but demo rides has become such an incredible factor, because what we find is as soon as someone's able to actually drive one of our vehicles, it smiles. It's, oh my God, this is amazing. This is great. And really, explaining to them how safe they actually are. I've personally driven this vehicle in Texas, Florida, California, all the most dangerous highways in America, right?
Good point.
And I'm not a motorcycle person. I didn't come from a motorcycle background. So even for me, that initial, but once I got used to it, and that's what we find, again, all the events that we do, when people are really able to utilize it, they really enjoy it. We've also found an incredible use case, and this goes to the Eugene part of it, but our partnership with the Eugene Marathon. We've also had partnerships with the Honolulu Marathon where, the use case of putting them in these races where they don't want vehicles, they're going to put, smog into their runners, lungs and things like that. So
Yeah. I imagine, and maybe you've done focus groups or stuff like this, where you take an average person and they may look at your vehicle, and one person may say, "Yeah, but it looks too small," or maybe it just is so different from a traditional car that I'm not ready for it yet. Versus another person who may say, "Boy, that looks like a lot of fun." And does it skew amongst? Does it break down generationally, or is it really just a matter of each individual kind of has that?
It's definitely each individual. So, again, with our vehicles, and like with any vehicle, you're going to have the early adapters, right? So we have an incredible group here in Eugene. We have an incredible group in Florida, California, who are folks that were early followers, the evergreen owners, is, what they are. And they were the initial people who came and said, this is great. I want one today. And then obviously there's now when I initially came on board, my background was really in experiential marketing, so in consumer engagement. So right away I said, we need to get out, we need to get in the masses, we need to put people behind the handlebars of these things. And there are going to be those conversions. Obviously, people are already EV friendly. We find a lot of success with Tesla owner groups, for example. But then there are going to be people who are a little bit of a longer, journey to get there. However, what we found is once people actually are in our vehicles, they are owning them. It's just they're telling their friends about it, they're loving it. And it's a great experience.
Yeah. Talk about that more fleet side of it, because obviously I think looking at it, and certainly someone who's lived in a lot of big cities, it's so easy to see an Arcimoto replacing like bike messengers or that, the DoorDash small delivery type thing. Talk about that expansion of the business.
Absolutely. So especially with the launch of our modular utility vehicle, really leaning into that, we have current customers in New York City and Los Angeles and a lot of those more urban areas, as you just described. My dad actually lives in Harlem, New York. So for him, when he saw those vehicles, he's like, oh, this is perfect, right? So, definitely going into those markets and saying, hey, listen, instead of using a conversion van to bring one bag of food or a couple plates from point A to point B, you could use our vehicle. You're not only saving on, obviously gas, fuel costs, everything like that, but you also could you have 25 cubic feet of storage, which is quite a bit. So we've really leaned into that starting last year, really leaning into that fleet side of things. And a lot of that is too, again, just really us sending representatives to these different states, these different cities, working with the Clean Cities Coalition, which exists across the entire United States, and getting in front of the decision makers and saying, hey, listen, this is a great option for you if you're interested in utilizing it for your fleets.
Yeah. Well, so Miles, my last question is kind of, what do you think the near-term future looks like for Arcimoto, and whatever you're comfortable sharing in terms of, is it possible that we could see a larger Arcimoto vehicle or kind of like that modular you talked about? Talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely.
If you could.
Absolutely. So the future Arcimoto is certainly definitely, we hear our obviously our customer base, and the biggest complaint about Arcimotos is always the full enclosure, right? So it's the even though we offer half doors and we actually have a vendor now who could do the soft Jeep windows on it, people want fully enclosed vehicles. It's a comfort thing. We get it. Okay. So there are plans in the future for creating a fully enclosed version of our vehicles. When that's going to happen, I can't tell you this moment, but we're working towards it. Also, really, to your point, leaning into the utility version of our company. So yes, still the consumer side is great. We absolutely want to continue catering to that, but really leaning into these markets and the Ubers of the world, the Targets, the Amazons, all these different companies who are doing last mile logistics and delivery and saying, listen, here's a vehicle with the MUV, again, where you have a removable box on it that you could park essentially in a motorcycle space, have your driver be able to get out real quickly, do it, and you're saving so much money on fuel costs. In states like California, which we have an office down in San Diego, a lot of these states are mandating at this point that by a certain time, companies have to go to a zero emissions vehicle. So really leaning into that. And a lot of it is just relationship building again, and just putting people behind this, the handlebars of our vehicles.
Great. Well, Miles Bell Brown, the Director of Marketing for Arcimoto, really appreciate you coming in and talking to us.
Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it.
That's the show for today. It's quickly becoming a matter of when, not if, most people listening right now will buy an electric car. The demand for zero-emission vehicles and the supply from car companies is quickly going to meet and produce a nearly all EV future. But until that day, there are still planning, construction, and energy consumption logistics to work out at the local, state, and federal level. I want to thank my guests for coming on the show and talking with us. Jessica Rikers with the Department of Energy, Logan Tellis with the City of Eugene, Aaron Olowski from eWeb, and Miles Bell Brown from Arcimoto. This show, along with all episodes of Oregon on the Record, is available at klcc.org. I'm Michael Dunn, and this has been Oregon on the Record.